us on hashtag Assembly Transport, and those in the building can do so too. Can I also remind people and myself to switch off your mobile phone, please, or put it on silent, so as to avoid any disruption. Right, I just need to do a couple of bits of business, and then I'll introduce the guests. So first of all, declarations of interest. The committee is recommended to note the list of offices held by Assembly members. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest in specific items listed on the agenda and declare at any other relevant interests. Any takers? Good. Minutes. Can we agree the minutes, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you. List of actions. The committee is recommended to note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings of the committee. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Right, lovely. So now we move to the highlight of the day, cycling infrastructure. So first of all, can I welcome Nigel Hardy, Head of Project Sponsorship. Welcome, good to see you again. Then Lily Matson, Director of Transport Strategy. Good morning. And then Dr. Will Norman, the Mayor's Walking and Cycling Commissioner. What a wonderful
morning.
Morning. And lastly, Councillor Julian Bell, Chair of Transport Environment Committee, London Councils. Morning, Julian. So, if we can kick off, I shall ask the first question. This is to all members of the guests. So why have there been delays in delivering new cycling infrastructure under this mayoralty? Will, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'll start with that. I think we've actually been making very good progress, I think, with the work that's been going on under the current mayor. We've been delivering an awful lot of schemes and a lot of programmes that have both been announced in terms of we've got a really healthy pipeline of projects. We've been developing and designing, taking things out to public consultation, as well as delivering at pace. I can certainly provide some examples on that. I know many of you will be familiar with some of the east-west cycle superhighway that goes actually from Tower Hill down towards Parliament Square. That we finished that route all the way down, and with the new segregated route in front of Buckingham Palace, that was finished in December. You might not be aware of it, but there is the route from Blackfriars going up to King's Cross on Cycle Superhighway 6 is under construction at the moment, and that's due to finish. So that will give us that's due to finish in the summer. That will give us a continuous cycle route from Elephant and Castle all the way up to King's Cross and beyond. And then we put out for consultation on CS4 and CS9. So CS4 runs from Tower Bridge down towards Greenwich, and CS9 is from Olympia down to Brentford. But then there is also, we've been doing a huge amount of delivery on the construction of the quiet ways across the city. We've finished 100 kilometres of those routes. As you'll know, Quiet Way 1 opened in June 16, and there are, I think we've got work going on 100 kilometres that have been opened, significant sections opening in the spring across the city. And what we're seeing is, so those are the Quiet Way superhighways. We've got ongoing work on the Mini Hollands. I was down in Kingston this week looking at the infrastructure that's being built right now. So they've been, we opened working with the borough down there, we opened a new segregated route along Portsmouth Road last year, and we've seen the figures coming back from that, which really shows how this investment infrastructure is actually changing things. Those figures showed that in the weekdays, so from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on the weekdays, you've seen a doubling of cyclists using that route. So it's gone from between 76 and 105% increase in cycling across that route. And when I was down there this week, we saw huge new investment in front of the station there, which will have a new cycling hub, as well as a new bridge, as well as other routes opening up. So the Mini Hollands are continuing at pace. We've also been, and I don't know if many of you saw the announcement that was this week, we've been planning the future as well. So we're putting out our pipeline, how we design our new routes, how we go forward. So in November, we announced the first 7 of the Livable Neighbourhood Programme funding schemes that are in different boroughs across the city. As well as we announced the first 6 of the next generation of cycle routes, which we will be working with the boroughs to design over the coming years, and we've got £142 million in the current business plan to deliver those. So I think we have been making significant progress in terms of the construction, in terms of the changes. We've been working, we've not only been delivering stuff on the ground, but we've also been planning stuff going forward. I don't know if any colleagues or Julian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, from a borough perspective, I think the example of the East-West superhighway is a good one in that there have been delays in that, but that's issues about where the route was in the western section between Paddington and White City. But the reason it's been delayed was so that there can be more intensive and better consultation with the boroughs in order to make sure that we get a route that works and that happens. So I think that's a general principle across the board going forward, and a lesson to learn from the superhighways is more in-depth and early consultation with the boroughs to make sure that the intelligence that the boroughs have got is fed in, and that can then ensure that we get the right scheme and that we get the support for it locally and the delivery as well. So the other thing I'd say is that there have been some and will be some delays as a result of the LIP funding cuts that we've had announced in the last couple of months. I think what that will do is it will have an impact on corridor funding and the actual integration of cycle infrastructure into our main highways projects that we do. Because I think that's something that boroughs need to do better. All boroughs need to do better. And where you have a chance to change a road layout, don't forget cycling, don't forget the cycling infrastructure, and make sure that it's integral to any kind of corridor project or funding. But obviously, with the cut in that funding, then that's going to have a delaying factor, and possibly worse than that. On the other hand, I think it's also that there's another problem in terms of the repairs funding for the general highways, which we've been told that the boroughs on the principal road network will only have safety repairs for the next 2 years. At best, we hope that we can work on that, because again that has an impact on cycling, and I hear it all the time from my Ealing Cycle Campaign members that, and I see it as a cyclist myself, there's nothing worse than a big pothole and a danger to cyclists than a big pothole, and those regular repairs of the principal road network, I think, need to be addressed so that we can have that smooth tarmac that cyclists love and which we don't always get in order to encourage more people onto their bikes. But the only other thing I'd say is I think that there needs to be a mechanism whereby boroughs can propose routes to TfL. And again, it's sometimes, and I think we're doing this through the Healthy Streets agenda, address sometimes the conflicts between bus priority and the Healthy Streets agenda for cycling and walking. And I can think of examples in my borough where we've got the Livable Neighbourhood Funds at West Ealing, where we will have an opportunity to kind of tackle some of those tensions between bus priority and cycling and walking infrastructure. But I think boroughs have often got ideas that they want to put forward, and we probably just need a better mechanism to do that.
Could I just add, Just to sort of widen the focus a bit away from infrastructure, because I think we'll spend a lot of this morning probably talking about that. But in terms of getting and encouraging people to cycle in London, it isn't just about the delivery of routes. And it's important to note that sort of over the last couple of years, the kinds of activity that's going on at the borough level or via TfL on that has increased and is having a really manifest effect through cycle training. Thousands of adults are being cycle trained, thousands of children are being cycle trained, and the kinds of promotional events that we know are also important for actually raising the profile of cycling, whether it's Ride London or more local schemes. And so I just think it is really important to focus on the infrastructure, but one of the points that I'd really want you to leave you with is to overcome the barriers of why many people don't cycle. We need to do so much across those other activities, and that all of that has been moving forward at pace in recent years, and that's why we've seen in the most recent cycling monitoring a very significant increase of about 8.8% increase in cycling on all London roads, and I think that is that's both a reminder to us to keep going with this, but it is also a signal that whether it's the infrastructure, whether it's the training, all of that activity is critical to driving that growth.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say anything, Nigel?
I completely agree with Lily that we need to ensure that we've got a mixed package when we go out, which is something we've worked extremely hard to do, and all of the infrastructure that we do put in comes with a package of measures to ensure that we're maximising the potential of that. I also completely agree with Julian as well that we've got to go forward with our infrastructure development very much in partnership with the boroughs. So many of our forward plans provide funding for infrastructure on borough roads. We work very closely both on the Quiet Ways programme, which is a £122 million programme, and the Central London Grid programme, which is an £85 million programme. The boroughs are closely involved right from the early planning stage, and we work collaboratively to try to see those programmes through.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on this
I
point?
did, but perhaps you could give us some idea of how these cycleways, their input and how they're being assessed, because the conversation we've had around cycling is almost entirely positive. But many people have written to me and other Assembly members, and there's still great hostility to them. In our last meeting, people talked about how disabled people and visually impaired people have enjoyed the reduction in motor traffic. But if you speak to people who live with these things, they say actually they have a bigger danger from cycles. People are talking about the armadillos and the orca segregations being a trip hazard. People are talking about the bus borders increasing congestion, and these things don't seem to be appearing in assessments anywhere. TfL have no mechanism to record trip hazards and accidents caused by the input of this infrastructure. And I'd just like to ask, is it time for someone to independently assess these so that we can make sure that they're being done in the correct way?
So thank you for that question. I mean, and it is actually that kind of personal and anecdotal feedback is really important for us to gather. So actually, if there are issues, we'd be happy to hear them and pass them on. But we are and have actually had exactly what you suggested, which is a study of the new types of infrastructure that we've been putting into our streets, looking at the impacts and effectiveness of things like mini orcas, larger orcas, semi-segregation, bus stop bypasses. And there's some research which we'll be able to be publishing later in the spring on that. And by and large, the customer reaction, both from pedestrians or people with disabilities or people cycling, has been very positive. But what we did get out of that was some quite clear advice, which we'll translate into our design guidance, about avoiding in some locations which are very busy with footfall, very low vertical deflections because they can be a trip hazard. And where the other types of semi-segregation, for example, like wands, might be better put in place. So that research has been done, and what we need to do, we do monitor this carefully, and then we will go back and revise our design guidance. So I sort of take the feedback, but I also wouldn't want you to think we weren't doing anything about that. We are constantly trying to learn from what we're putting into the street network.
And follow up on Lily's point, as well as the research side, there is also the stakeholder engagement. So core part of my job is actually going out and meeting and talking to people. I've been meeting regularly with the RNIB, as you mentioned, some of the people with visually impaired who have had problems and struggle with some of the infrastructure piece. I think the bus stop bypasses are particularly sort of have been a particular sort of concern for some of those. And what we've actually done is put cameras up. So rather than listening to people, but also then studying the impact of things and trial different things. So in different locations across London, we've been trialing and experimenting with zebra crossings going over to the bus stop bypasses, which begin to signal to everybody that the pedestrians have priority in terms of crossing those cycle routes to get to the bus stops. We've been experimenting with whether they've had beacons or whether the zebra crossings are significant. They've been filmed as well as being watched in terms of interviews and analysis, but the cameras have shown that those zebra crossings are significantly more effective in terms of protecting pedestrians getting across there, talking to the different user groups, particularly vulnerable road users, people partially sighted community, as well as disabled community. How do we then roll that out across the new types of infrastructure? So as we put in new innovative ideas, with all of this we're trying new things, we're pushing the barriers, we're coming up with new ways of trying to tackle some of the problems on London streets. We need to keep assessing them through the research, but also through listening to stakeholders and communities, and then acting to change those, because it's all well, we once things go in, it's not as if this is fixed, it's how do we continue to improve, how do we continue to innovate in this space?
It's just that as a member, there's a litany of problems that people write about, from anything from increased congestion to pollution, visually impaired people being affected. And I wonder, how has there been so many things that have been missed, and will you be able to address some of these things? There's one thing I'm looking at here about the 105, that the input of the cycle lane has meant that the nearest shop is over 90 metres away. Blue badge holders who are now barred from going to that shop, because if you could walk that far, you wouldn't have a blue badge. Surely someone should have looked into that before they affected all the local people in that manner, because it's a place apparently it's very popular because you could park there and shop there. There's things here about older people losing their independence because of the input of a cycle lane. Is someone doing a wider assessment, impact assessment for the locality, for the people that actually live there? Because it seems like we are forcing these things upon people because we think generally they're good. But are we looking at what it actually means for people who live there rather than what it means in this room?
So I think Will has said something very important in terms of, in order to make the progress that we have in London, we've had to innovate, we've had to come forward with new ideas, new ways to crack problems. We've gone about doing that by, wherever possible, undertaking significant off-road research. So we've researched particular styles of infrastructure and new ideas in controlled conditions. But obviously, as those are introduced, we then need to follow that up with the kind of research that Lily was talking about, and the kind of engagement and communication that Will was talking about. We are doing that, and we're collectively learning. And I think some of the issues that I think you may be describing, where people have concerns about designs that are coming into their local community, we have the benefit now of a growing set of successful things that we've implemented in London that we can demonstrate the benefits to people. Things like bus stop bypasses, we've learned from our earlier implementations, and we've made improvements, and we will continue to do that. And if there are specific issues on a local route, then we will receive that feedback, and we will go back and have a look at that and try to assess that if there seems to be an issue.
I don't doubt what you're saying, because TfL in particular have a very good record of assessing things, and it's great expertise there. But I think what the people who'd written to me is, would TfL ever consider not doing a route? Because there is effects that they feel cannot be mitigated if the route is there, and they're suggesting that the desire is to make the route happen no matter what. You have people talking about 70% less footfall to their business. No amount of design is going to fix that. And I just wonder, in the interest of balance, if we let people know that there is a flexibility here, because I am pro-cycling, I'm a cyclist myself, but you have to accept there's great animosity to some of these routes.
This is, I think, exactly why the early engagement with communities, with boroughs are so important, why we take so much time and patience and work for our formal consultations and soliciting people's ideas. And so I'll give you a very good example on the CS9, which runs from Olympia through to Brentford in West London, where there have been plans that have been assessed, we've taken those out to communities, and then we've had an awful lot of feedback. So like you, I get a lot of emails and a lot of correspondence looking at some of the challenges. So we do look at all that and take it seriously, go back to review, and where things are problematic, then clearly we look again at it and modify that. But there are also some myths that sort of continue to sort of be present here, and I think that you touched on one around the cycling schemes cause congestion, for example, which all the evidence shows that is not the case. Cycling does not cause congestion. The cycle superhighways are showing that those routes are moving more people than ever before. It's a very efficient use of road space in terms of the numbers of people that can move along there. And there's recently, you mentioned this is not just TfL talking about this. There's an independent report that was recently published that the GLA worked on with Majesty's government that showed that 75% of London's congestion is down to too many motor vehicles, as well as having roadworks, new developments, breakdowns, etc. So I think there is we will always be listening, we will always be looking to modify and work with communities when we put information in, but then we also need to use the evidence that we have to show the benefits of that. So the congestion myth, I think, is very clear. You touched on some of the issues around local businesses, and I take this really very seriously. The evidence that we've been looking at and building, which we'll be publishing soon, shows that for the vast majority, they're actually seeing an increase in footfall, and you're seeing the benefits that more people walking and cycling bring to local businesses, and can play a role in regenerating and reinvigorating high street shops and those sort of things. Some of the evidence that have looked at cycle parking, for example, brings more benefits than car parking places, because cyclists and people walking tend to spend more in shops. So I think what we need to do more of is actually sort of taking the research that we're doing, communicating that, and not just putting it out there, but actually engaging people in conversations and making the case for the benefits of the infrastructure that we're putting in a more serious way.
Can I just add to it? Because I think the other thing that hopefully would reassure you on that point is the new routes which were recently announced that we're looking at. We're talking about these as connections between places. We're not saying that this is a fixed route. We've drawn a line on the map, and sorry if your house was right beside it and you didn't like it. It's an alignment, and it's the start of a conversation, which is about, picking up Julian's point as well, about involving the boroughs and getting them to work with us to actually identify what the best way to make that communication between our evidence can show where there's the greatest potential. Solving that potential is partly about community engagement, it's partly about working with the boroughs, and it's partly seeing what we can do. And I think that whole announcement demonstrates a completely different approach on that, which will hopefully be reassuring to some of your residents.
I suspect I'm going to stop now because the chair's doing a Jedi mind trick on me. But I just
very true.
I just want to. I'm going to forward you some of this stuff I've been sent, because I sometimes feel our conversations around cycling are not quite as balanced as they could be, and these people have real evidence, and they would say to you, consider their evidence in the way you expect them to consider your evidence. But that's enough from me, Chair.
Joanne, do you want to come in?
Yes, I think we've all had that same letter actually, and it's from an Enfield resident, and of course I represent Enfield and I live just off the A105. I think it's fair to say that the cycle lane have just been completed, and we haven't yet had the cycle bikes appearing, so it's still very quiet. But I think there is obviously still concern. And last time you were here, Will, I did ask you about the research into business, because local businesses were saying they were having a great footfall, but that was whilst there was construction and barriers all along the street. So your research into business, is it going to be looking at that, the A105
What we're doing is pulling together, so at the moment there's sort of one of the challenges is that everybody says, oh, well, our area is different, our area is different. So what we are doing at the moment, and Lily's team are leading on this, in pulling together, how do we pull together a central pool of all the research that is pulling together those economic benefits associated with walking and cycling schemes. We are not at the moment commissioning individual research into every individual project because it's prohibitive in terms of budget to do that in every space. But what we want is a publicly available, publicly accessible sort of repository of all the information that we're building up that are coming from various different independent sources. From the universities are doing some of this work, other stakeholders, think tanks and the like, both here in London but also across the UK and internationally. Now, I know when people sort of see some of the international evidence, they go, oh no, not more stuff from Copenhagen or from Amsterdam, this isn't Copenhagen or Amsterdam. But I think it is very useful having the sort of the complete spread of that evidence, that's complete, you know, that body of knowledge is being added to. At the moment, we don't have a single place to put that and engage people with. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
It would be very useful because I think evidence is obviously vital,
yeah.
And you know, the one letter we've had talks about up to 70, 90%. I've heard other figures ranging from everything, including benefits actually as well. So I think that evidence is going to be vital.
Because I know from the Enfield side, I've had letters as well from people who's talking about how the benefits are brought.
So yes.
So, you know, there is some people are seeing expressing some negative views, other businesses are seeing positive sides of that. So, you know, there's a...
The one thing I would say about the A105
Yeah.
through Palmer's Green in particular, I've noticed that I think one of the bus shelters has gone in, but others haven't. And at the moment, the cycle lane is like a buff colour, and then it goes into just a normal tiled area. But you talked about zebra crossings, so could I ask if you can, once the cycles come, just really monitor that? Because it may be that we would need that zebra markings. I think that's going to be really important. But it's good that you're doing evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, if I do the next part, which you did mention this some time ago now, Will, about the new 6 cycle routes. That's a very interesting announcement we had earlier this week. Are you able to give some specific dates as to when they may be completed at all?
Well, as Lily alluded to, what we want to do is go about how we're working with boroughs and how we're working with the stakeholders in a different way. So as I think when I was here previously, I talked through a bit about the strategic cycle analysis, which was all the evidence-led approach to looking at how do we invest, where do we invest our limited resources to get the greatest potential and get the largest number of people cycling and walking in those spaces. From that evidence, which we've been sharing with the boroughs and is openly available to everybody, the next phase of that has been talking with borough officers as well as talking to other stakeholders, and they're talking, well, of those routes, again, not saying that they're aligned to specific roads, they are from place to place. So, for example, from Ilford to Barking Riverside, or from Wembley to Wilston Junction. Rather than saying TfL will go away and come up with some great plan and say, look, this is what we're doing, what do you think? We need to be working jointly with the boroughs, with the officers, with the local communities who know these areas, so we get the greatest number of outcomes, and we get, as Julian was saying, this buy-in at an earlier level. It's a different approach to engaging. So, to be honest, we don't have the designs of these routes. We are wanting to work with the boroughs. What we announced is that we will start that work jointly with the boroughs, TfL teams and the borough teams, as well as other stakeholders coming to part to find those best and most deliverable so that they can get delivered and we don't end up having some of the obstacles and challenges that we've had in the past. So I can't give you a set date because we haven't decided exactly where they're going to be or exactly what designs those will be and what investment is required. What we do have over the 5-year business plan is money to deliver those routes, and so they will be delivered within the time frame of that business plan. But I don't have for each one of these, say, this will start here, this will start there, because we are doing this in a different way. We need to do this collaboratively in a way, working with the boroughs to say, look, how is this going to work for your communities? How is this going to work for our outcomes and get those benefits? So it's a different approach to how we're delivering things than we have done previously.
But do we not have any idea when they may sort of come into being? So even down to a year or?
Well, over the next year, we'll be working on the designs with the boroughs, and then we'll be looking at public consultation on those, and then we'll be looking at the delivery of those associated with what goes on with the public consultation. So over the next 5 years, those routes will be delivered. Quite when within those 5 years will be dependent on exactly what gets proposed, what level of interventions are required along those routes. So you know, it's what we've announced is the design phase is starting, and we'll be looking to deliver them in the next 5 years.
We can assume it won't be in the next 2 or 3 years, then, can we?
I think that depends on how on the boroughs, on what the designs are, and I hope some of them will be delivered sooner rather than later. But we have to work in partnership to do this.
But it's also alongside the very major programme of cycling infrastructure that Nigel's leading on now anyway. So it's not. So this is the design and development work. Meanwhile, the CS9s, CS11s, all the other routes that we've been consulting on CS4s, they'll be coming forward. So it's not that there's going to be any pause in terms of building.
This is the future pipeline, if you like. So we've got the plans that are being built, we've got the plans that are being consulted on, we've got the plans that are going out, both a raft of things, but we also need that future routes that will be designed together with the boroughs.
So the 142 million, from memory, that is what you assume may fund these, all 6, is it?
That's what we have in the plan at the moment. Without the designs, we can't cost every individual route because you need to understand exactly what you're paying for that. But we believe that with that 142 million, then we can deliver a lot of this. If we require extra money going into that, then we'll look at how we work with that with future budgets. But I think it shows the level of our commitment that we're investing that amount of money to deliver these next 6.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that Brent, we are one of the recipients of this announcement, which has been very, very much welcome both by the local cycling campaigners as well as the borough stakeholders as well. You mentioned the design of the routes and stakeholder engagement and public consultation. I think engagement is very, very critical, both in the design, the actual route itself, and that's where, at the design stage, I would like to see genuine consultation with those local cycling campaigners and other lobbies as well, so that we can deliver what the local community, what the local campaigners are seeking for, and iron out problems at that stage. And then public consultation, therefore, doesn't become a fait accompli or something which is just ticking a box, because that's where public consultation goes completely pear-shaped if we haven't got proper input from the local stakeholders at the design development stage.
So could I respond to that, Chair? I think absolutely, as Will has described, that's exactly the way we want to go through doing this. I think it would be fair to say that our public consultation is effective. We have demonstrated that we've gone out with all of the major cycling infrastructure that we've introduced in recent years, had extensive conversations, and have been able to demonstrate where we've made changes in responses to feedback that we've got. But we want to extend it beyond just a set-piece style consultation, as you suggest, with pre-engagement, early dialogue, so that the initial proposals that we might bring forward for a wider public consultation have already had a considerable degree of input. But in order to do that, we have to have a package of route ideas that we work on early on, and they may come forward at a different pace depending on the style of routes that's identified and the particular issues that we've got at certain locations. But yes, we want to achieve what you're describing.
Okay. Can I just follow up on that briefly, Chair?
Yeah.
Just so I remember when I came and spoke with you on my first I must have been my first month in the role, one of the things I did say that we wanted to look at is how do we do this engagement, how do we do the consultations, and rather than just focusing on the formal consultation, I think this pre-engagement, the conversations is absolutely essential, and I think that's some of the lessons that we've learned from infrastructure and some of the changes that have happened in the past. And I think the examples of some of the engagement in the Mini Hollands have been really evident on this, particularly in Waltham Forest, where there was where the first stage of engagement wasn't necessarily in that conversation, that early conversation with all stakeholders, that pre-engagement. So the subsequent approaches that have been taken in the Mini Hollands have been much more collaborative and much more of that discussion, and we've been taking that learning and seeing how we can apply that to the wider route. So I really hope that the approach that we're taking for this future round of investments is signalling to yourselves and to members of the public and local communities that we're doing this in a different way.
Okay. Just a very quick question. How did you come up with 142 million? As it's not really costed and as you're not really sure, why 142 million? Where did that figure come from?
Well, budgeting is we were always looking at what money can we put into what. Nigel, I don't know if you want to sort of allude to how those
It's a figure that's not divisible by 6, I know that. So I just wondered how you come to 142.
So in very early budgeting planning, we just have to take an indicative idea of cost for a package of routes and run that out over the life of the business plan in terms of what we may expect to achieve during that business plan. And so the number will be generated through that process.
Interesting. Caroline, did you want to come in?
Yes, I did want to come in on the money. I was talking with the Mayor last week on Thursday in the budget plenary about the fact that there were currently, at that point, only 20 kilometres of cycle routes in the pipeline, so it was going to be very difficult for him to meet his pledge to triple the cycle superhighway routes during his mayoralty. So I was really pleased to see this announcement. Really like the stuff you're saying about how you're engaging with people, because I think that is key to being able to get projects to actually happen on the ground, which is the important thing. But on this 142 million, is that new money, or is it money that is part of this 5-year programme that I was told about in an MQ? I asked about, we were told there's 111 million this year, 183 in 1920, 195 in 2021, 175 in 21-22, and 182 in 22-23. Is this 142 on top of that money?
No. It's part of the... that money is part of the 5-year business plan.
But it depends when you had that answer, because...
I had that... I haven't got the date of the MQ, I'm sorry. It was, but it was... Oh, no, that came via members' correspondence on the 10th of January.
So that would be the...
That would be included
so the
within that.
142 is actually part of that.
Yes.
So
it's not new money then.
So it's not actually new money.
Well, it's new money in terms of we had money within the business plan. What we are saying is this is what we're going to spend some of that money on. So we've announced what it's going to spend. It is an additional to the... We haven't changed the TfL business plan to add £142 million from it. What we have done is saying this is the Healthy Streets, but this is the Healthy Streets portfolio, and this is what we will be spending some of this on.
Okay, thank you. So then my next question is, when you are spending this money, because the thing is, this year you've just got 111 million in the plan for spending on cycle infrastructure, and if you're working on a 5-year business plan and you have a big dip in spending, you're in danger of pushing all the spending into future years and not actually being able to physically deliver and spend that money in those future years. So actually your average spend that you're talking about at the moment could go down. So I think, what's really important is that we actually see you spending that money, and obviously you've got to take your time to do your to do all the consultation, because then the projects will go through much more smoothly. But that you can see that that people are worried that you're pushing all the spending into future years. Does Nigel or Will want to?
I would understand the concern that you're putting out, but we have an average spend of £169 million per annum within the 5-year business plan. That is a record level of investment in terms of London Cycle Network. It equates to similar levels of investment in the top European comparators per capita head. We have a very, very strong programme in front of us. Clearly, we have to go through a design and development process, and the bulk of that money gets spent at the construction stage. But we've got strong spend in the middle years of the plan. It's not all completely backloaded.
Of course, but the thing is, this mayoral term finishes in 2 years' time. We're halfway through the mayoralty. So if it gets shunted forward into the future, there might even be a different mayor. You know, there might be a new business plan, new priorities. So it's just, I think what people want to know is that there is real commitment to
there is certainly the real commitment to spend this money. Even as you mentioned, the 111 million is significantly more than any other year than any of the previous administration. So it demonstrates the commitment that we are investing into cycling. And I think we have to manage that budget in a way that we will be delivering, we'll be delivering the routes as they come out. So we're totally committed to this. We're investing record amount of money. We've got a very healthy pipeline of work coming forward. We've got schemes out for consultation, and that money will be spent, and we'll see the changes in cycling across London as a result.
And I think some of your concerns comes from, I'm sure, from previous years, pre this administration, when we didn't spend the whole cycling budget. Actually, in the last 2 financial years, this financial year we're on target, aren't we? Yeah. The last one spent all the budget. So it's not, actually, it's a problem we've resolved to a degree. We have a programme. Because it's much more researched, evidence-based, and then based on this consultation and engagement, I'm much more confident we will then be able to just have that steady drip, drip, drip of delivery at a constant pace, which isn't got massive up and down escalations.
Thank you. We'll watch and see.
Caroline. Yeah, can I just get a view from Julian from the boroughs? What confidence do you have in the ability of TfL to spend this cycle funding? Are you also concerned that it doesn't sound like it is new money, it's what was already in the business plan budget? And also your take on these 6 new routes, this new concept, how are the boroughs feeling, or is this kind of news to you?
Well, as I've already said, we welcome the approach of doing earlier engagement and kind of deeper engagement with the boroughs. That has to be the right way forward. I think it's also fair to say that some boroughs are better than others at engaging and pushing these cycle superhighway infrastructure projects forward. And so I think there is an onus on the boroughs to also engage positively and make sure that there is delivery. I think TfL are going about it the right way in order to try to get that borough buy-in and engagement and then have a scheme that everybody's happy with. So I think we're happy with the way that things are moving. We like the Healthy Streets approach. We think that that's absolutely the right way to go and the way to bring our local residents with us. And also, it's about not dividing and recognising that car drivers are also cyclists and pedestrians and ensuring that and those are lessons I think that have been learned from the first kind of round of Mini Hollands and superhighways. So I think we're happy with it. I think there is a point also where there's political leadership required, both at City Hall and at borough level. And I think, ultimately, these change is always difficult, and it will always require some courage to make change and to bring forward cycle infrastructure. And I think, you know, you do have to ask yourself the question. Sometimes there's a kind of expectation that parking and facilities for cars is a kind of given and is expected, but yet it's really difficult to deliver cycling infrastructure. Well, why? All the arguments are in favour of cycling as a sustainable mode of transport and for the efficiency and health of the city and its residents. So I think we've just got to, all of us, work together and provide some leadership.
Rachel, in terms of spending of the money, are you confident around that and assured about the amount which is part of the existing budget?
We recognise that the Mayor's was clear in his manifesto when he was first elected that he wanted to invest more in cycling. We welcome that. The money's there. I think Lily's answered the question in terms of the fact that we're spending the budget.
Boroughs have confidence in that now.
I have confidence in that, and I certainly know that there are boroughs like mine who are kind of falling over ourselves to get hold of some of that money, and we're, you know, and I know there are other boroughs who are, you know, have got schemes in the pipeline and are ready to go with them. So I think we can working together do it.
Thank you. One last question from me then, and then we'll move on. We actually spent quite a bit of time on this one. The Kentish Town to Wood Green, the top potential, this is identified as the top potential route in the strategic cycling analysis, and yet it's not listed as one of the 6 new routes. So does that mean that further cycle superhighways routes are planned under this Mayoralty?
So these what we announced this week were the first 6 of those top 25, and obviously there has to be some prioritisation and what do we go first with. We feel that those are the ones that we can lead with. We will continue to work with the boroughs on those other routes, and the plan is by 2023 that we'll be delivering those the full 25. So there will be more announcements, and as we start beginning to look at the other routes.
Okay, leave it at that. So now, Caroline.
Yes, I want to talk about the transport strategy, please. And the Mayor's final transport strategy is under development. Is it going to include incremental cycling targets so that we can hold the Mayor to account for delivery?
Pick that one up. So I think it's really important to, so yes, the strategy is being finalised, and obviously at the centre of the strategy is the overall ambition and target that we achieve an 80% mode share in London by 2041. And that is made up of a number of different scenarios that we've built up and assumptions in terms of how trips will change and how the economy will grow. And so when you look to the 2041, it's a trajectory. And we haven't and won't be specifying any specific modal outcomes for 2041 because to a degree it would just be false science. We would be guessing, if you like, because what we need to do is use that ambition, that long-term target, to manage this process through our shorter-term processes like our business plan. So we know exactly where we are aiming for in the course of this business plan to increase the journeys from 770,000 trips a day to around 1.2 million by the end of the current business plan. We're still aiming for that 1.5 million journeys a day by 2026 because we know that if we stay on that trajectory, we are basically within the tolerances, if you like, to head towards that 80% mode share. But ultimately, that 80% mode share depends on a number of exogenous factors as well, in terms of, you know, how much we make progress in terms of improving rail services in London, what the whether we are able to better manage road space, what the ultimate growth of London is, and where that growth takes place. So the strategy is a strategy. It needs to be actively managed through each business plan period. But in the short term, as course of the business plan, we have been clear. We're still working towards that 2026 target, which was in the previous strategy, and that's very much in the direction that will take us to the 80%. And obviously, we publish information every year through the Travel in London report, as well as through our regular finance and business reports on cycling growth, so that we are keeping quite a forensic scrutiny, if you like, on this growth and whether we are moving forward in the right direction.
We as a committee made very clear that we think you should have targets along the way. The previous mayor did have a target in his 2010 strategy of 5% modal share by 2026. Your 1.5 million a day by 2026, is that 5%?
I need to go back and just double check exactly what mode share that represents now, but because it might not equate to exactly that, might be slightly more, might be slightly less, but that's the number of journeys that would be equivalent in 2026.
We would like to see that in the final strategy, and I'll stress that again. And if not, you're talking about every business plan, then that should have a clear for that 5 years. But given that your own analysis suggests you're going to share will increase to 70% by 2041 without any of your interventions.
No, that's not.
That's your analysis. Yes, in your challenges and opportunities report, it's in there. So I think we would like to see those targets in place so that we can measure you and really make sure that you are on track.
The challenges and opportunities report, just understand that 70% requires delivering every single thing in the existing business plan, Crossrail 2, the Bakerloo line extension, all of the cycling schemes that we are currently investing in. And then to move beyond that, beyond the 70%, you need to go further with other, actually 70% does, beyond 70% actually includes Crossrail 2, but you also need to include some of the other measures that we've talked about in the plan, such as looking to road user charging or other measures that would manage demand. So that's why, in a way, just focusing on cycling targets won't get us to the strategy. And we need to be looking at both how people can be encouraged to do shorter journeys by foot and by bike. And the schemes that we're designing are multi-purpose schemes in many cases now. They have to accommodate those other functions. So we are taking this sustainable and active travel focus for our strategy. And I think that's the right way of driving forward through the targets we set as London.
Okay, in the strategy you talk about high quality safe cycle routes. How are you defining that, and will you be providing more information on these routes?
So we have the London Cycling Design Guidance, which will be the basis of what we're doing on there. When we're looking at high quality routes, that will include the segregated and segregated routes that we're familiar with, but also in terms of some of those lower traffic routes on the quiet ways, for example, where you have got modal filters and reducing traffic along those routes. So there are also how you then manage that at junctions and how you create the safer space for cyclists in the junction. So we will use the cycle design guidance as the basis of that. That continues to evolve in terms of what we're looking at. But when we're looking at a high quality route, we are looking at both the segregated where it's appropriate, as well as increasing the increasing the amount of filters and modal filters and traffic calming measures along some of those quieter routes. So it will be a combination of those two.
If you're not prepared to consider a target in the strategy, and you've given your reasons for that, what about having different mode share targets for different boroughs? Is that something you would consider? Is that something, Julian, you and the boroughs would welcome?
In our response as London councils to the Mayor's draft transport strategy, we said that we would want some interim delivery milestones, and we thought that would be helpful. I think if we did have any targets incrementally, then the boroughs would want to have initiated the same kind of collaboration and working together with TfL that we've talked about earlier in terms of jointly owning those targets and then working together.
Indeed, the LIPS guidance will set out how to achieve those interim targets with growth. So that guidance on that will be included within the LIPS guidance in terms of how we'll work with the boroughs on intermodal share targets.
Through the LIP process, each borough will develop modal share targets.
No, I just need to clarify that because I need to go back and see what exactly. I know that we're considering the setting of interim targets that we can work with the boroughs on. Some of those will be around safety.
Interim targets for mode.
Yeah, can I write to you to confirm that?
So I think that's something we'd welcome, and some of the evidence we had at our previous hearings from experts had suggested that might be a good way forward. And it sounds like as long as it's obviously developed with the boroughs, rather than a top-down approach, that could be a good way for everyone to be working together. The transport strategy also talks about street closures, promoting one-off trials, all that sort of thing. What progress has been made with boroughs and stakeholders to look at introducing more street closures and vehicle-free zones to enable people to cycle?
So we are seeing significant progress in this. You can see a number of planning applications going in, particularly around this healthy routes to schools and the street school streets initiatives. For example, in Hackney at the moment, a number of schools are beginning to close off the streets around those schools between drop-off and pick-off time, both in improving the air quality as well as the road safety and enabling people to walk and cycle in those areas. So we're beginning to see that carrying on, and we're continuing to work with the boroughs to promote that and share the benefits of that. I think Nigel touched on something earlier on, is where we have got pioneering and innovative ideas. What is then great is being able to show and demonstrate how that works for other people. So what is fantastic is there are boroughs. So Ealing are doing great work, Hackney are doing great work, a number of boroughs are really doing different things that work in different spaces, because obviously outer London and inner London, central London, very, very different challenges. But then when you bring people in to see how that works and the benefits that that's bringing to communities, that's how we begin to get this exponential growth of these approaches. So we're seeing those changes, both in terms of the street closures, but also other measures in terms of reducing air quality in outer London. There was a school that was doing some great work in terms of the kids monitoring air pollution outside their school at pick-up time. They found that as part of their science lessons and their science curriculums, they then used that to show that their air quality around their school was worse than Oxford Street that had been in the press. They then took that with the press, with their emotional stuff to the parents, to stop the idling and to stop the car parking going there. So it's about showing people these innovative, experimental ways of doing something and then using that to communicate that change. So we're seeing a pickup of those street closures, particularly in local communities and in areas around the city. In central London, we do an awful lot of street closures because of a variety of different major events. We had the Lumiere last week, but we're now in February, which was fantastic, seeing some of those closures, people walking around the street and enjoying walking around the street to see the art. So I think within central London, we need to make more of the event and the events that we're already having to close off our streets, to encourage more active travel and to show people what can be done when we limit that.
Can I just give an illustration of things that we've done in Ealing? So last summer we closed one of our main streets in Ealing town centre, Bond Street, for a couple of Sundays in August. It was very successful. We did it with funding and help from the GLA and TfL. But I think what that example shows is the complexity and the difficulty of sometimes closing major high street roads in your town centres, because all the bus routes that come through them, and so you've got to make sure that it's well planned, it's the right street with the least disruption in terms of those bus journeys and dislocations. But certainly it was very, very warmly welcomed by the businesses, particularly, who saw a real opportunity for them to expand the promotion of their street, their business into the street, and so it was supported by our local business improvement district as well. So it was, I think, something that we'll be repeating, and we need to do more of. One thing that we haven't done for a long time, but which was really successful, and again required an enormous amount of pre-planning, was back in 2010, I think it was. We did a sky ride where we closed off probably about 10 miles of roads and streets to give a cycle-only route and kind of circumnavigation of our town centre. And it was enormously successful, and it really got people on their bikes. What makes it prohibitive is that it costs. There was sponsorship, obviously, but it cost the borough 80 grand in terms of closing the roads and doing all the changes in terms of the bus routes and everything. But it was fabulous. More things like that I would really support.
We have the Ride London event, which is sort of, I think, the world's greatest celebration of cycling out of any city in the world. It's the only one. It's cost neutral to the city because it's paid for through sponsorship and the TV rights. But what that allows, one, it's the only race in the world where you have equality between the men's professional cycling race and the women's professional cycling race. So that's fantastic that London is showing that lead. But even more than that, on the Saturday, some of you will be familiar, because they're closed off the roads, we have 70,000 people coming and enjoying riding 8 miles around London. When it happened last year, I saw a kid doing a wheelie all the way down the Mall, from Admiralty Arch, from Buckingham Palace to Admiralty Arch. Must have been about 14 years old, and the smile on his face summed up just how important that is. When you look at some of the evidence on how that encourages people to think about getting back on a bike, or where the huge number of people have got bikes in their sheds or in their houses that they're not using, those moments are really important for incentivizing people and encouraging people to have another go on those bikes. So we will be making the most of that weekend as a sort of pinnacle event for celebrating cycling across the city. What we need to do more is to bring more people from diverse communities across the whole city into that event, so it actually truly represents Londoners and London's population.
That's great, and I think this sort of sub-regional sort of idea that Julian's talking about would be good to develop in future years. Finally, just in terms of the transport strategy, it didn't really talk about dockless bikes, which obviously sort of emerged a few weeks after. Some companies are working well with boroughs, others have not been so good. Are you welcoming their expansion? How is the work going with boroughs and TfL with them? And are we going to see them firmly mentioned in the final transport strategy? Why don't we go to Julian
I'm going to ask Julian because he's got
I have to say, as I cycled home the other night, I saw one of the multiple orange mobikes that are kind of ubiquitous around Ealing. Somebody on one riding in the opposite direction. And we've had a pilot in Acton since last September with about 750 bikes. And yes, it's been successful in that I think we had one complaint, and we had these designated parking areas which by and large people were using, and it wasn't causing us any problems at all. We were having reasonable usage, but you weren't actually seeing people that often on them. We've now since the new year expanded the pilot across the borough, and so we're connecting our 7 town centres, and I think those 2-kilometre journeys, 3-kilometre journeys that connect your town centres, if you can get people on their bikes, that's really, really helpful. And I'm now seeing that visual evidence of people on their bikes and out there. Now, going a little bit wider, we've had a few more complaints and kind of issues, as it's new for a lot of the borough, but we've done it in stages. We've worked closely with the operator, and it seems to be, I think, a great opportunity. And it's also about to be launched in Hounslow as well, so that we can go over the borough. I think I'm going to have to use one tonight when I go to Brent, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to do this? I'll just ride to Wembley Stadium and leave it outside, and presumably because I'm outside the zone, nobody will take it, and I'll then take it back again. But there are those cross-border issues at the moment which
So how is that being
we need to resolve.
So I just take a step back. One of the key barriers to getting more people to cycle, getting more people cycling in London is lack of access to the bike. So clearly, bike hire and bike share is absolutely critical to that. We've had a really successful, we have a very, very successful Santander cycle scheme going on. We had record numbers last year. I think we had 10.4 million hires last year, which is more than all the years that we've had so far, and that's continuing to expand and be successful. But as you said, the dockless schemes have arrived in London. I think we spoke a little bit about that at the last session, of some of the challenges that, particularly with operators showing up without engaging with anybody, and how that just creates problems. We came down very hard on them and actually seized some of those bikes. But what's been really encouraging is that the other operators are working very closely with the boroughs. So Ealing, Hackney, Islington, up in Waltham Forest, they've got another operator. So there are a number of operators coming together. What we've done strategically is we brought together all the boroughs and some of the other highway authorities and Metropolitan Police together for meetings. And with this group meets on a sort of bi-monthly basis. We have we jointly with the boroughs, as well as other highway authorities and other authorities such as Royal Parks and the police, developed a code of practice that basically sets out what good looks like for those operators to deliver. I think that's been welcomed by the boroughs. I know that the ongoing discussions in this will get refined. This is a new innovation that's coming to London. I think we all recognise the potential here, but we want it to work. Most importantly, what we want is to deliver a good quality experience to the customers at the end, because we know if people have a good experience, they're going to continue to use it. So the code is working. What we're beginning to see is neighbouring boroughs join up their schemes. In Amsterdam this week, they just launched a new app which has a joint, some of those companies coming together to produce sort of joint booking facilities and drop-off facilities. So I think we're going to, the direction of travel in this is to monitor it, continue to work very carefully, because we are getting some complaints of bikes obstructing places, or where there have been issues of criminal activity, breaking some of those bikes, according to vandalism or theft of those bikes. But I think these are teething issues. This has huge potential to get more people cycling across London, particularly in outer London, where we know that is absolutely an essential part. And we'll be continuing to work with the boroughs, with the police and all the transport authorities to refine that thing. We've also been talking very closely to the Department of Transport, and I know that they had a national seminar which we shared this code of practice more nationally on this to drive that forward.
Quickly, the responsible companies are all signed up to this.
Yes, so they've actually been engaged in it and working carefully.
And there'll be something in the transport strategy about this area.
So basically, one of the responses the messages we're hearing back in response to the draft consultation on the MTS was that it could be stronger around that whole technology area. So yes, that section is a little bit more assertive about what we expect of those kind of new business models coming to London, not just dockless, but other similar ones too.
Thank you.
Yes, just on the point about dockless bikes, I mean, we know that the sort of demographic profile of cyclists and indeed users of the Santander cycles tends to be disproportionately white male, quite a high income. I was wondering whether you plan to do any work to see whether dockless bikes attract a different demographic.
One of the pieces of guidance within this document is actually that the providers being able to share their data, and so we are working with them on which data is getting shared, and I think that's
sharing that with TfL.
Pardon? Sharing it with TfL, and so that we can use that to strategically plan future routes and where demand is and where there are gaps. The demographics will be interesting on that. Obviously, with some of this, it's private data and it's a private company, so how that gets shared and the constraints around that.
It can be anonymised, can't it? So
pardon?
It can be anonymised.
Yes,
can't
and that's ongoing negotiations with some of those providers in terms of how that works. But I think to your broader point, we need to diversify cycling. We need to get the cycling to truly represent sort of London and Londoners. And as we've alluded to earlier, we know that safer infrastructure is actually critical to doing that, but we need to go further and be more proactive with some of the groups that are less well represented in cycling, which is why we have a successful community grant scheme that we're continuing to invest in, which for example, I met people working with Bangladeshi women in Limehouse and a specific cycling scheme engaging them. And I think one of the approaches that's working in that space, looking at some of the evidence, is saying rather than this is a cycling scheme, it's sort of cycling with. So where there is existing activity within a social group, whether that is a health-based activity or another social group, you add cycling into that group rather than creating, oh, this is a cycling scheme for this particular group, come to us. It's how do we integrate cycling into those existing social networks? And that's been particularly exciting. I think the gender diversity is where we really need to provide a more focus. At the moment, I think about 13% of women in London cycle, yet 76% can ride a bike, and I think about 52% have access to a bike. And so we really need to be pushing how can we encourage and enable more women to cycle. It's very interesting looking at some of the early data coming back from some of the quiet ways, which is showing that more women are, the greater percentage of women are using those routes. So I think sort of having different types of infrastructure, different types of engagement, and I hope that we'll be having a conference on women in cycling in London this year to really signify that commitment.
Great.
Thank you.
Shall I move on to the...
Just 1 second.
Sure.
Yes, just before we do move on, can I welcome Surrey Square Primary School from Southwark. Hello guys, welcome. We're talking about cycling today, so I hope you find this bit interesting. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, your last point brings me nicely on to the next question, which is on quiet ways. And I'm interested, actually, if you've got evidence that quiet ways are encouraging more women to cycle, if that could be shared with the committee, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. We do have that and we do share it, but I would say that it's because that programme is still developing, we only have that from some routes at the moment. We're obviously monitoring routes as they get built.
Okay. And more broadly, what evaluation of the Quiet Ways programme has been carried out so far?
So, first of all, on the Quiet Ways, they're an essential part of the network of cycling that we need to provide in London. I think 80% of cycling happens on borough roads. We need to be improving those. The new infrastructure certainly shows signs that they're working. We undertake monitoring of the routes as they go forward, which we'll happily provide on those, as I mentioned, in terms of the change in the uptake in women, for example, cycling. But what we're also seeing is a greater increase on quiet ways, on the ones that we've studied. There are more people taking cycling, and we're seeing a greater increase along those routes than any other route. So, for example, Quiet Way 1 had a 56% increase on people cycling than compared with some of the other routes, so sort of in the low 50s and 40% of uptake. Interestingly, what we're also seeing is that Quiet Ways are seeing a higher load of mode shift, so people shifting from other forms of transport to cycling. So Quiet Ways, for example, are seen the ones that we've measured anyway, 45% increase in shift in mode. So 45% of people shifting from another mode of transport to cycling along those routes. Now that compares with the Mini Hollands, for example, around 37%, and I think Cycle Superhighways, about 42% of people using those have shifted from other modes of transport. So we need to be investing in that network of Quiet Ways across the city, and they're both connecting the sort of strategic locations, so town centres to town centres. Julian was gracious enough to invite me down to see their new cycle route, which within Ealing, and we opened that. It was great seeing the different schools along that route using that cycle infrastructure for a healthy way to get to and from school. And we know that not everybody wants to be cycling along busy main roads, even if it is protected and segregated routes. We know that this is a critical part of our infrastructure. So as I said, for all of those routes that we're putting, we're monitoring the number of cyclists. We're also doing some stop surveys to understand who the cyclists on there, because obviously just by counting, you don't get an understanding of that mode shift or the gender or any of the other backgrounds that we want to look at in terms of our targets. But obviously, with new, as I said before, new infrastructure, we need to continue to look at how we improve that. And we will continue to work with the boroughs, with TfL, the Mayor, across London to make sure that those routes are being delivered to high quality. There have been, I think it would be fair to say, there have been some compromises along some of the routes that have been delivered. And I know I've asked TfL and Nigel's team to undertake a review of the routes and the quality along some of the routes. And when there are challenges, we're tackling those head on.
In terms of quality, do you have minimum standards for Quietways, and can they be shared with us?
So I will, Nigel, do you want to talk a bit about the
Well, obviously we have the London Cycle Design Standards, which provide the background guidance for the boroughs that are working. We have an assurance process where we ourselves look at the designs that come through from the boroughs, but as Will has said, we're on a learning curve as the boroughs are with this programme. We've constructed 100 kilometres out of a 250 kilometre overall programme. There are 30 boroughs involved in this, so it's a hugely complex picture. And we are now starting to go back and look at some of the proposals and look at some of the designs and starting to say we don't think in the context of this area some of these designs quite fit, and are working with the boroughs to revise that and bring that up. So there isn't a minimum fixed standard because there are so many different contexts, but we're very, very aware of that, and I'm very keen to ensure that we've got the right quality route sections coming forward. As an example of that, we've got 6 sections we're expecting to open in the early part of this year.
Quiet way.
6 quiet way sections. So they're what we would describe as significant sections. We don't want to get into just how many kilometres have we produced and effectively salami sliced the programme. So we are dealing in significant sections which we would equate to above 3 kilometres in length.
Are these part of the 2 existing quiet ways? These are new quiet ways.
Yeah, there's a whole range. So I mean, to give you a feel, we've clearly opened the whole of Quiet Way 1, and that's up and running. But we've already opened significant sections on Quiet Way 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14, 22. And I think because of the length of the routes and the complexity of the delivery environment, that's the right way to go. But we are making absolutely sure that the sections we do open are significant sections connecting through to significant destinations or making significant...
So there are more quiet ways along the way?
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, I think we've heard evidence. I mean, Simon Monk from the London Cycling Campaign basically said they'd not been a success. Andrew Gilligan's made his views on this very clear, as he always does. But just so we're clear, Will, the Quiet Ways programme is going to continue.
Continuing its delivering results, to think that they should be stopped is a nonsense. We need to be able to provide a network for all of London, and I know my predecessor has some idea now that it should be just focusing on the TLRN. That would exclude whole boroughs from actually having access to safe cycling. We need to be investing in this. There is a programme of investment. You'll see new routes the routes beginning to open up, and that will continue because they're an important part of our network.
I'm not a cyclist, but I did cycle Quiet Way 1 with Sustrans, and it's clear where investment has gone in and there's some very nice interventions, but there are also some sections of it where you do interact with some very busy traffic, and I can see why the people who it's aimed at might find that quite intimidating.
Completely, and that's why we need to continue to work with the boroughs. I think that reducing the level of traffic, the volume of traffic and the speed of the traffic along those routes is absolutely critical, and that's why the filtering is so important, and where we're seeing the success and people are liking that is where you've got that sufficient filtering. So we'll continue to work with the boroughs. I know Julian's got a lot of experience and knowledge on this. So
I was hoping Julian would come in very quickly. I know we're short on time, just on the borough commitment to the Quiet Ways programme.
Yeah, 100%. And I was going to make a comment about the quality of the Quiet Ways. So Will talked about what's called the Ruislip Road East Quiet Way, which we're doing in 2 phases. Will and I opened the first phase, which runs halfway between Greenford and Ealing Broadway, and the second phase will take it all the way to Ealing. But the quality of that Ruislip Road quiet way is just superb. You know, I'll just ride down it just for the smoothness of the ride, just for the fun of it, because it is just first class, you know. And I'm a kind of hardened cyclist who is quite happy to mix it with the traffic. But actually, I'll make sure I always go on that quiet way, because even somebody like myself who's quite happy to mix it with the traffic, you know, you immediately relax and you get this absolutely smooth ride. And you know, no wonder the kids are cycling to school that link off that route, also cycle to the leisure centre and the swimming pool that's on that route. So no, 100% support them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, next. Caroline. Caroline?
I've got some questions about Outer London, and I'd like to thank both Will and Nigel for coming on Transport Committee visits to Outer London to see just how hostile some of those street environments are during the rapporteurship on hostile streets. We're obviously expecting a response to our recommendations, which I think we're expecting in March. Is that right?
Our response you hopefully receive before March.
We should receive it before March.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's marvellous. So in terms of Outer London, we know that there is huge unmet potential for walking and cycling in Outer London. 55% in Outer London, whereas in Inner London and Central London, it's more like 35%. And Rachel Aldred told us at our last meeting that the injury odds are 7 times higher on Outer London roads. So my question is, how can the significant unmet potential for cycling growth in Outer London be met while the roads are so much more dangerous for people who are cycling, more risky, in Outer London than Inner?
Start with I just wanted to pick up the point about the sort of ambition around Vision Zero, which is at the heart of the MTS, because Rachel's right in terms of the risk per journey is much higher in Outer London, even though absolute numbers of people being hurt is higher in the centre, and we know that what stops people cycling is fear. And when that fear is rightly placed, then we need to do something about it. So that the ambition to Vision Zero places, you would focus first and foremost on tackling speed. And I think there is a real need to tackle the speeds before you even start thinking about cycle routes, actually reducing traffic dominance and reducing dangerous traffic speeds in Outer London. So the Mayor's Transport Strategy sets out very clear policies around the need for extensions of 20-mile-an-hour zones. That includes our own roads as well as the borough roads, and greater enforcement of speeds. And, well, you might want to come and talk about routes, but I just think creating a speed-friendly environment is the first and most important thing you're going to do to tackle that risk point.
Low speed-friendly environment.
Yeah, low speed-friendly environment, somewhere where you feel safe anyway, and are safe. That's a prerequisite to anything else we do.
But I think building on that, once and at the same time, we need to be looking at how we're delivering safer routes in Outer London. I mentioned before, when my recent visit to Kingston, that was very encouraging, seeing when you put in those routes the increase in number of cyclists in those areas. I know, Caroline, when we went out to Waltham Forest, you could see some of the changes happening there, and also going out to Enfield and looking at the great stuff that's happening there. What I'm very excited about is in this recent announcement of the number of new routes, we are actually looking at Outer London routes here. So I went out to visit Barking Riverside, obviously significant development in Barking Riverside, cycled around that area. You're having 15,000 new homes going into that space. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is there to connect people so that they can choose a healthy, sustainable mode of transport on that, and connecting those developments not only to the new stations that are going in there, but also the other areas such as Ilford, which is why I'm excited that we are now looking at putting in new infrastructure in Outer London. But as well as the end-to-end routes, I think what's really important is actually looking at how do we drive some of those local journeys. You talked about the high potential in Outer London. Now we know there's very high car dependency, but there is very high the potential in terms of the number of journeys that could be made. And I think the essential part of that is not necessarily thinking that we need a route from Hounslow to Dagenham all the way across London. What we need to be thinking about is those radial routes into town centres and around transport hubs, which is why we have the Livable Neighbourhoods programme. We announced that we did an announcement of 7 new schemes in 7 boroughs working on their Livable Neighbourhood programme. Now that's some of those are outer London, outer and inner London. You've got Ealing, Greenwich, Hackney, Harringay, Havering, Lewisham, Waltham Forest as part of that first round, and that's the first year. This is a £114 million programme. What we'll be doing, a lot of boroughs applied for that, but what we need to do is improve the quality of the applications and work with those boroughs far closely, just as we've been talking about with the other routes, to make sure that the types of proposals that are coming from the boroughs, because these are largely borough roads and working with them, so that they are very high quality, so that we can invest there and drive that potential, particularly for those local trips around those sort of town centre transport hub radials.
So when do you anticipate that the first livable neighbourhood schemes will be delivered?
So we announced the first range, the first stage of the funding. So that's getting all the plans up to delivery, so feasibility design and out for consultation. We're working with the boroughs, and going out to visit them to work on improving that. So there will be different schemes at different stages of development, so that will be an ongoing process. What we will do is have another round of applications next year, so there'll be another node, so that will create that pipeline. Which will come first, I'm not sure, because it depends on the stage of development of each of those schemes.
Okay, so presumably these livable neighbourhoods are learning from the Mini Holland experience. So when will your evaluation of the Mini Hollands programme be published? Are you expecting to publish one?
Clearly, we, as in all of our schemes, we would monitor the success of the programme. I would think something like 12 months when we start to see the full impact of an entire Mini Hollands programme. So even Waltham Forest, which has been running ahead on their development, is not yet complete. So I think once we've given a time for the whole investment in a particular area to be implemented and to fully complete, then we can start bringing that kind of analysis forward. In the meantime, though, as you've heard today, and you can see in part of our evidence submission, whatever facts and figures we are getting back from the boroughs, we're introducing that as we go.
Because certainly it seems if you're wanting to raise the quality of the bids that you're getting from the boroughs, then sharing as much of that learning from the process of consultation for Mini Holland, but also in terms of what works and what doesn't work. It's been quite a gritty process for some of these pioneer boroughs, and it makes sense for other boroughs to learn from what they've done and run with the good stuff efficiently. I think we've seen from the year 2000 to 2016 in Lee Bridge Road, there's been a 763% increase in cycling. But just in 2015-16, and that's with Mini Holland not yet finished, we saw 97% increase in cycling. So clearly, they're doing something that's constructive and helpful.
And I hope with some of the questions that we've answered up until now, we're showing how the learnings from the Mini Holland and other work is just getting integrated, not just into livable neighbourhoods programming, but across all our work, in terms of consultations, in terms of greater borough engagement. And we have to have that learning and sort of prototyping approach to delivering this as we go forward.
Can I just add that boroughs are also keen to learn from other boroughs that have already done this. So in Ealing, we've had a cycling commission, and we had Clyde Lokes from Waltham Forest as one of our commissioners and present what they'd learnt from their Mini Hollands. So, we're trying to get as much best practice as we can from wherever, in order to make sure that our livable neighbourhoods project is a real success.
Would that be a sort of an ongoing programme of sharing and learning? I mean, could TfL help with the boroughs with that?
I think obviously cycling is one issue, but obviously the Mayor's transport strategy sets a whole change agenda for London. So one of the things we're considering right now is exactly what support and workshops and information and data are we going to provide regularly, particularly over the next 12 months as boroughs will be redrafting their local implementation plans. So that is a programme of activity and outreach which we're planning right now. And I'll be speaking with Julian about this to see what's actually going to be helpful when and where.
We're going to have to move on. Thank you very much. We've really run out of time, but just, if Joanne, 5 minutes, if you can just do your bit.
In actual fact, some of what I'm going to ask you, perhaps you could write in writing to me. So if I can just let you... obviously, cycle parking is a real issue. And as cycling increases, there's a need to provide secure cycle parking. I understand that there's 22,000 reported cycle thefts each year, and that cycle retention is an issue, and a quarter of those people that stop cycling or reduce it, say, lack of parking is a real issue. So I wonder if you could just write to the committee, let us know whether you've got any figures for what the shortfall is, perhaps over the next 5 to 10 years, and whether you've got targets on that. And Andrew Gilligan, when he was here, said that the previous mayor met his 80,000 targets. But then I got some emails afterwards saying, but how did he count them? And did they count the ones that were taken away or the ones that were in private businesses and therefore not open to the public? So if we could just have some real information, that would be very useful. But perhaps I could ask you, now is really one of the things, it's fine on the street, but actually lots of people want to cycle, want to run their own bikes, but don't have space at home. I'm going to ask both Julian and Will, if I can, about what you are doing to ensure that people who want to run their own bike can just, I know Hackney's, for example, leading the way with their street hangers, where residents can hire a hanging space, and I think, Julian, you started doing that in Ealing, and some boroughs subsidise those for residents, some don't. So I'm just wondering really what the barriers are and what plans you've got for those.
I think I'll start in London wide and you can talk a bit about Ealing, would that make sense? So certainly you're completely right. Bike parking is essential. Every journey starts and stops with that. I think one of the challenges is actually looking at how much bike parking is actually available, because as you rightly say, some of that is in public land, some of it is in private land. What we're doing at the moment to really, so from 2008 to 2016, I think we delivered about 130,000 bike parking facilities, bike parking spaces, for places to lock up your bike across London. What we're doing at the moment is an audit of all the cycle infrastructure across London. Now, that's a digital audit that will help us inform a whole raft of different things, but cycle parking is one of the things, so which will really, by street, analysing what infrastructure is there, including the parking facilities. Now, this should be open, and this will be open data that will be shared, which should be available later this year, I hope, but there's some technical challenges in doing this. No other city has done this, but that will help inform a lot of strategic investments going forward, including wayfinding and other things. But the parking side of that will also allow, so we can actually see, well, where are the parking spaces across the board and be able to make investments along those lines. We're continuing to invest in parking as part of each one of our schemes as we go forward, and we'll continue to be doing that. And I suppose more broadly, as part of the Healthy Streets agenda, the bike parking is one of those indicators. So for all our schemes, that will be part of that. I think one of the things to really point out what's changed recently is the London Plan has now got very specific minimum cycle parking requirements for a whole raft of different types of developments. So whether that is a nursery or a place of work or a hospital, it's got or flats themselves. It's got minimum requirements for new builds and part of the planning process. So that's both on terms of the number of full-time employees or students in a place, but also the number of visitors that would be attending. So I think that will help deliver thousands of places into the new developments and retrofitting it in as you part of that. But then I think it's how it gets delivered into the existing housing stock that is the challenge. We're continuing through the LIPS money and other areas. There will be borough parking facilities. It's not just Hackney that is now doing the hangars. I know Ealing have done it and other boroughs.
Do you issue guidance as part of that LIP funding about cycle parking, where they should go?
not so much
I
where...
didn't hear your question, so.
Did you, in your LIP guidance to boroughs, do you include cycle parking?
It's in terms of one of the items that boroughs should be considering investing in. Yes, indeed, yeah. But the specific guidance on where you might want to do it isn't actually in the guidance itself. It's more generally available from us. Can I just add one point? It's not all good news though. So that one of the barriers I would highlight is just finding space in central London. And for us, one of the real challenges is mainline rail stations.
That's one of the questions.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
No,
well,
you'll answer it now.
Okay, well, basically, so there are some good examples of parking at mainline rail stations, but getting access to space in these stations is a real challenge, and ensuring that other agencies like Network Rail and those people responsible for the land value the space for cycle parking as highly as cyclists or we might do has been a challenge. And so I don't actually have a solution for that. I just flag that and sort of say that is a problem. We do need support on that area.
It's depressing that if you go into the new London Bridge development, however millions and millions of pounds on there isn't a single sign that I could see that had a bike indicated on that. Now there are US airports that have better parking facilities than a mainline rail station. So it's absolutely critical that Network Rail play their part in terms of doing that to deliver the strategy for London.
Well, first of all, London councils did some polling about air quality, and one of the questions we asked was how could we get more people to take up cycling, and 23% said that we needed to provide better secure cycle parking. So the issue of bike theft is a real issue, and it's one of the curses of being a cyclist. So quality cycle parking and safe, good, secure cycle parking is really important. So yes, we've done the bike hangers, and again, it's about and taking away sometimes car parking to replace it with cycle parking, and it always there's a tension and it becomes controversial, but you do it because it's absolutely the right thing to do. I think also. I know we're talking about trying to get people with their own bikes to have some parking, but again, the bike hire schemes are all part of this for those who don't have their own bikes. What we've said as a borough is that we are going to kind of cover the borough with Sheffield stands. Those are the hoops, and make sure there's one outside every shop. Because again, this economic argument is really critical, and so every shop should have some Sheffield stands outside it in order to get people going to those shops to spend their money, and we know they do more so than car drivers. But again, it's about space, and clearly, in our town centres, again, you can look to take away some car parking and replace it with cycle parking, and we've certainly done that and will do it.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, ladies and gentlemen. It's been very informative. It's been a bit longer than we predicted, but that's because it's a very interesting subject. It's very important for London. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So while we're waiting for the change, we go to item 7, the work programme. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And the date of next meeting, 19th of Feb. Agreed. Thank you.
Oh, it's
I leave those everywhere.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks.
Do we note the we No.
Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
I am exactly right. Can't speak without clean glasses. Just the two water glasses.
Right, well, good afternoon. Very sorry to have kept you waiting. Do appreciate the time. I know that you're a bit pushed for time today. So
I've got an appointment at 1:30, but I think you'll be hungry before then, won't you?
Definitely. I hope to think we get finished long before then, but thank you very much. So welcome Val Shawcross, CBE, Deputy Mayor for Transport. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
And of course, Alex Williams. Good to see you. We've worked together in the past, so
we have.
Good to see you again. And you're the Managing Director of City Planning Transport for London.
Director, City, but not
Director, yeah, Managing Director, yes,
no,
indeed.
Well.
Yeah.
Not today.
On your label.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Oh, right.
Just take it. Just
all right. Okay.
Lovely. Well, welcome. So we have some questions for you, but before we start, would you like to make an opening statement for that?
I was just intending to say a few words about where we are with the redrafted Mayor's transport strategy, but that might be something that you've got in the questions anyway, so it's up to you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll kick off then. Yeah. Did you want to touch on Crossrail at all? Either one or two.
To say something about Crossrail?
Yeah.
Yes, you will. I hope you will have seen that we had a very open and thorough discussion at the Transport for London Board. TfL Board is now meeting in this chamber, so the meeting's more accessible for you in the sense that you can listen to them on the webcam. And as part of our commitment to transparency, we have made real efforts to rub sometimes some of the gloss of some of the people who come to give evidence, and we've asked on this occasion this week it was Sir Terry Morgan to come and give a honest, open and factual account of where things are as interest grows as we get closer to the completion of the project. I think it's really important, the Mayor thinks it's really important that we are keeping Londoners up to date and yourselves, and in particular the board. So Terry Morgan talked about the programme and where we are on it. Of course, the project is now 90% complete. At the moment, it is still within the budget envelope. However, there have been some issues. The fact is that this is the very last stages now of a huge and complex project, and there are risks. And I think we shouldn't hide the fact that in any project like this there are risks. The construction work has gone very well, as you know. The biggest risk we identified was the fact that the signalling software environment, I'm not pretending to be an expert, those words flow from a piece of paper into my mouth, but the signalling software environment has 5 different systems on it. So the integration of those systems and getting the same trains to function on all of those different systems is always going to be challenging. In fact, that seems so far to be going fairly well. There isn't any wood to touch, but that does seem to be going very well, and Sir Terry reported that they'd had one of the trains down to Heathrow to test it there, and that worked. The issue that has arisen is that before Christmas, energisation of the scheme was supposed to be started, so that would pave the way for more testing. The trains have to be tested on and run on the tracks to get the final certification for safety. In fact, the circuitry, I've forgotten the name of the equipment that was concerned. The circuitry didn't just not function, but it actually made a bang. They investigated it. It seems that there was a design error in the equipment that went in before Christmas. That had to be taken away and redesigned, and they tried to energise it last night, and last night it didn't work, apparently. I haven't had a report back, I don't know if Alex has, as to whether or not they think at this stage that it was caused by a minor issue or a more major one. But clearly that is a problem. Crossrail is still predicting that they can meet the overall time targets and that we will be looking at opening the Paddington to Abbey Wood section in December this year. But clearly what happens now is it does start to compress the testing time. So, you know, this is the worrying stage of the project, and our commitment is to be honest with people about what's going on and where it is. Having said that, you know, it was ever thus. Any major project has a difficult time in the past. Somebody quoted Sir Alex Ferguson, and I'm not supposed to repeat it, but it has something to do with, you know, shuffling in your seat in the last stages of a match. We're in the last stages and things have gone very well. I think the good news is that Bombardier, who are responsible, of course, for the trains and the signalling, the software connection, have really been, we are told, putting their very best people on it and giving it huge time and attention. So there is no lack of expertise and personnel working on the completion of the project.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Could I just ask you to comment on the Capita's profit warning?
Capita, Capita at the moment only manage the congestion charge call centre website back office functions. So paying the fees to congestion charging. They over a year ago, around Christmas, some of you will remember that there were a series of outages on that website, and we had some trouble. And we had trouble because they weren't reporting to us that was happening, very alarmingly. We were hearing from our customers before we were hearing from them. That caused us, politically as well as professionally, a lot of alarm, because in particular Capita were due to be commissioning the changes for the T-charge functionality, if you remember. So very strong lights and interventions went in. Capita, I'm very pleased to say, rose to it because they knew that they could not let the mayor down on the implementation of the T-charge. And we've had very, very good service from Capita this year, and they are performing like a strong contractor and a strong organisation. TfL always keeps an eye on the financial status of contractors, and there is always a contingency step-in plan for every contract, as there was with Carillion. So I think at the moment we've got no concerns. And should they be bidding for any future contracts, there would be due diligence done, as there is always due diligence done on the finances.
It's worth noting, Keith, in the board report, there's some data that's tracking Capita's performance. So the story that Val just talked about, their performance worsening but improving, that all of that data is in the board reports in the section of Vernon Everett presented.
That's very helpful.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Okay, we'll move on to my first question then, which is, can we expect to see significant changes from the draft version when the Mayor's transport strategy is published? Can I just add, and do you accept that the Mayor needs more mode share targets for specific modes and interim targets before the end date of 2041. Start with that.
Okay, if I can say a little bit about the MTS, some overview stuff, and then perhaps Alex would back me up if some more detail. Just to say that we did have over 6,000 responses to the consultation. What I thought was very interesting was well over 500 very key stakeholder organisations across the realm, not just transport ones, but business and disability and voluntary sector, etc. We had very substantial and detailed commentaries from a lot of very good organisations. So it was a very sort of profound dialogue happened, I think. London Councils, for example, gave us a huge and detailed response. That's been being and has been analysed. I have to say there was a lot of very good stakeholder meetings as well. So in addition to the engagements that TfL organised, we got invited to lots of things and took up those opportunities. So I think it was a kind of really healthy opportunity for London to talk to its transport operator about what it's doing, how and why, and all sorts of stuff came up. We're on track to be delivering you the finalised version for your assembly meeting, which I think is on the 12th of March. So we should be publishing properly before PERDA, and we'll be the first of the Mayor's strategies to do so. There were quite a lot of things that were said, but if I can pick out the ones that seemed more consensual, sort of broadly based comments, there was a lot of support for the broad vision of the strategy, which I think is why we got so many good responses in. It was sort of, you ask people really serious questions and they give you some serious answers. Very strong support for the Healthy Streets approach and for the 80% mode share broad target. There's a lot of welcoming from it. Very interestingly, the health sector really responded very positively to it as well. And there was broadly a lot of support for the strategic direction. And really the questioning was about, we want to see it, when are you going to do it? You know, when do we get it? The particular things that people picked out, improvement in air quality, very strongly supported. Walking and cycling proposals, not particular schemes, but broadly what we're doing, very strongly supported. A very strong support for the Vision Zero approach, which we have yet to spell out in more detail, and that is coming shortly through the TfL board system, to tackle road danger. And in fact, there was a strong call for us, why don't we do Vision Zero, you know, zero deaths right across the transport sector, which was quite interesting to me because we'd gone for Vision Zero in the draft MTS because for the rail sector, although it's branded differently, there is a sort of Vision Zero approach and there's a institutional framework and procedures and targets. So we thought we were addressing the deficit in the roadscape, you know, where so many people die and are injured on an annual basis. People said, well, I like Vision Zero as a concept. Let's have it across the board. So I thought it was interesting. There was quite a lot of commentary on road user charging and quite a lot of support for that, even though the reference in the MTS was a relatively short, we want to explore this reference, and there was, we want to see more coming back from the community. A lot of support for Crossrail 2, a lot of support for rail devolution and metroisation, particularly from the passengers. Lots of support for comments about improving station capacity, and overall support for buses, but actually the boroughs, amongst other stakeholders, saying we want to make sure that we get more of a say on those bus services. Support for the principles of what we're calling good growth, which you'll see across the other strategies, i.e. where development happens, it will happen more sustainably if it happens around public transport modes and with Healthy Streets investment in. Quite a lot of support for the Mayor's continuing objection to Heathrow expansion from stakeholders. So that felt like a strong message. The kinds of things people said we hadn't either said enough about or were worried about included things like the demand that we should say some more about the opportunities of new technology. So we'd laid out some principles in the first document, but of course we've been doing more work in the interim. You know, things have happened like dockless bikes, I heard you talking about. There's a lot of enthusiasm for things like autonomous vehicles, the whole concept of mobility as a service. So we should say a bit more about that and our approaches. But I think it's important to point out that, you know, it has to be, those things have to be looked at through the prism, through the glasses given the policy direction in the MTS. So road space, for example, is still an issue. Health is still an issue. So, you know, it's not completely unalloyed enthusiasm, but what can we use that is beneficial for the community? There was a lot said about Outer London. A support for, we want more modal shift in Outer London because we want more public transport. You need to be doing more. So we were looking to what we can do to strengthen the public transport offer in Outer London. We need to say more about freight. Again, that was one of the areas where we knew we needed to say more about freight, and we've carried on working on it. Freight consolidation, efficiency, cleaning it up, taking more stuff off the roads and moving it around to sustainable needs. More demand for more to be said about public transport accessibility, not just station access, but you know, how communication with disabled passengers and that sort of thing. A lot of demand for more rail capacity, even where it wasn't ours, but we'd like it to be. More ambition on the tram extensions, strong lobby for the tram extensions, and a desire for more proposals for orbital public transport. In fact, there was a very strong pitch made by the North West London boroughs, Hounslow, Ealing, all the boroughs around there, for a development on the Dodding Hill freight line. So a real desire to see an orbital overground system, which we've looked more at. And, you know, a few areas where there was very mixed views. You know, the community has a lot of different views about river crossings, the type, where they are, all of that. So those are the kind of things that we'll see. So just as a headline, I'll say we will be strengthening the narrative around the new technology. We will be clarifying the Vision Zero policy and addressing this point about let's have some standard approaches there. We will need to be doing more work, and this isn't necessarily in the next MTS final, but just work to be done on rational approaches to street space allocation. There's much more about freight and coaches in there. A strengthened narrative on National Rail, a strengthened narrative on Sutton Tram extension, and we went to see Sutton and Merton yesterday on that, and a strengthened proposal. There's this tiny little squiggle in the draft MTS about the proposed West London orbital rail line. Well, we've looked at that proposal in much more detail, and I got escorted around the route with a whole bunch of council leaders. I was in really august company, but very interesting proposals, and I'm very pleased to say Network Rail engaged with us on that, so very interesting. So some good stuff there, and a lot more, as I said, generally we think on Outer London. So those are the things, just as the sort of headlines. I've got the tracked version here, Chair. I won't dip into it in the meeting, but I just want you to know that it does exist, and it is being kicked around all of the mayoral advisors and of course the mayor himself. Yep. So we are on track to produce what I hope will be a powerful document for the future of London.
That's brilliant, actually. But there are those who are concerned about the modal share, and you know, you have targets in there around cycling and walking, but can they be disaggregated so that we know what the target is for walking, what the target is for cycling and so on, so that there's a clearer idea? Also, the other request from this committee repeatedly is around what I would call a pathway or steps. So we know you have the Vision Zero, but in order to get to zero, you have to make a number of steps. So would you be able to give sort of targets, either yearly or 5-yearly, as to where you'd like to see yourself and how you get to zero? Because having a zero at 2041 is very admirable, but
I
you don't
understand
just go
what you're
zero.
saying, Chair. You know, it's about people wanting more security about the delivery of the ambition.
Yeah.
It's difficult in a strategy which goes over such a long time, and we've set a very strong direction. The design of this was it is the intention of the annual review of the business plan and the business plan itself to give us that shorter term detail of the steps that we want to take. So on cycling, modal share, for example, because that's where we make it real. The further away you go, the more fictional it is. So, and I would also say that there is an issue about what we're trying to achieve here, which is a much more integrated approach. The Healthy Streets approach is much more integrated, walking, cycling, public transport. So some of the schemes that go in, you know, they cover an area, they are, by definition, catering for improvement of access to public transport, improvement in pedestrian and improvement in cycling. So you know, it's much less difficult to say, here is these schemes, this is the chunk of money, and this is the precise outcome. Because so many more of these projects have got to have multiple benefits. But you will see the targets in the short-term documentation around the 5-year rolling business plan. And the broad targets are in here. The 80% sustainable transport target, so walking, cycling, public transport, it you know, is a real target. But then how exactly the breakdown of that will be at this stage, it's very difficult to see, you know. However, that's where we know we want to get, and we will be giving expression to that. In fact, we're going to upgrade that target to the number one policy in the document. So it is a mayoral policy.
Is it worth me to say a little about on in the Mayor's Transport Strategy, we've got roadmaps that set out how we're going to move towards the ambitions for zero emission transport, for accessibility, and for bus improvements. In terms of Vision Zero, we're probably going to see that in the document that we're working on now, in terms of the Vision Zero strategy, in terms of where we are in terms of interim mode share stuff. It's about us making that real in the business planning documents and the scorecard documents, to making sure that we are all working towards that overarching target there. So the last thing we want this to do is, when it's published, it kind of gathers dust or props up screens or anything like that. This has to be a real working document that genuinely shapes how TfL runs its operations going forward.
Okay. We heard actually earlier Councillor Julian Bell referred to the reduction in LIP funding this year, and I just wondered which elements of Healthy Streets may not be delivered as a result of that reduction in LIP funding.
The Healthy Streets programme as a whole is in shape. The element of the traditional LIPS programme that's suffered a reduction is the LIPS corridors and the road maintenance. And you know, we appreciate that is difficult for the boroughs, and it's particularly bad for the next 2 years. However, the Healthy Streets programme is intact. We're still managing to deliver over an average of over 200 million per year on the borough schemes in total. So you know, that is regrettable, but it's not a huge hole in our delivery of Healthy Streets or the projects. The issue of the way that we've talked about this, the issue of the way that TfL has had all its revenue grant funding removed does mean that we are less revenue resilient. So, and of course we get no money for the roads now at all from the government. So it is quite a difficult issue. The Mayor has asked us, following the discussion that was held with the plenary, the Assembly plenary on the budget, to look at, is there anything we can do on this? So we're tearing through everything again, although we had gone through it, to see what we could do. It is far more difficult to find revenue than it is to find capital, but we will be going back to the Mayor, hopefully at the beginning of next week, with some ideas. Is there any way we can offer further assistance to the boroughs? But it is an extremely tight year financially. That is just a fact.
Okay. We have in the past actually asked for a breakdown by borough of LIP funding. Would that be possible to have that?
Yes, that is possible. In fact, we are working on a breakdown not just of LIP funding by borough, but borough funding by borough, because there are many schemes, for example, the gyratories removals and improvements, where 2 or 3 boroughs might be affected. Many of the cycling schemes cut across 3 or 4 boroughs. So if we looked at everything that is spent on the ground, we ought to be able to try and give some indication of how much by borough.
That's very kind. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you. Now look to David.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning. So I'd like to ask you about private hire and taxi trade in particular. And one of the things that people are concerned about, which is causing congestion, is an increase in the number of private hire vehicles being licensed by TfL. It's, I believe, increased from about 50,000 in 2013-14 to about 90,000 today. One of the things that's been talked about is making private hire vehicles pay the congestion charge. So are you going to make them pay the congestion charge?
This is something we have been talking about. There is work going on right now, and there has been for some time. When we get the final outcome of that research work, we would be aiming to do a consultation on it this year. But this moment, I haven't got the final package of work.
And the notice that we started work on this, we sent that to all of the private hire operators so that they're aware that we'd started the process, so that they're aware that this is going on. But clearly we need to understand the analysis that comes back with about, and particularly the effect on small operators. As to what implications removing of that exemption would have. So we've started the work, but it's for a consultation later this year, essentially.
Potentially.
But I do understand there was a feasibility study which has been done by TfL, but that's been delayed a couple of times. I mean, I hear that the Commissioner told the committee in March last year that there was a study that was ongoing, and he said in July 2017 he would provide the feasibility study to the Assembly, but that hasn't happened yet. And do you know what's happening with the feasibility study?
Well, David, can I just say, in general, there is a resourcing problem around taxis and private hire staffing. You said yourself there's been more than a doubling in the number of private hire vehicles and drivers. There's been a huge array of legal challenges being thrown at TfL. The volume of correspondence, sometimes from the same people in huge volumes. This department is very, very stretched, and quality really matters, and because livelihoods are affected. And also it has a big requirement to assist with the lobbying agenda, which is really important to us. We've now got the support of something like 50 other licensing authorities around the country on this issue of the need for changes to the out of area rules. So there's a huge workload facing this this part of Transport for London, and you know sometimes the delivery has to be prioritised. You will notice as well that the taxi issue, you know, the ZEC taxis coming in, the electric taxis, all of that has been extra work for the section. But the work will be done, and I can only say I'm sorry that we've not been able to deliver it as quickly as we would like.
I don't know if that gives you any confidence or not, but in response to those resource challenges, the work on this is shifting to my team, and that feasibility work, because of those resource pressures, was never completed. So I think we need to get a group set up to look at this properly and complete that in a due.
It hasn't been completed.
No,
okay.
So that's what the work we've just restarted.
Okay.
And when it's done, we will release that in a timely fashion.
TfL as a whole has been undergoing a transformation. So there has been job vacancies to fill, people leaving, but now city planning is up and running, led by Alex. That's a good, secure place and the right place to do this kind of research and planning.
But do you need to complete the feasibility study before you then do the consultation that you need to do?
Yeah.
Yes.
But we're aiming to do the consultation this year.
This year sometime, so in the next 12 months or so, okay. Well, moving on to something slightly different. I mean, one of the things the Mayor has said he wants to do is to try to get the powers to cap private hire licences, the numbers that he has to issue. And of course, that would help with congestion. He's mentioned that a few times in answers to questions I've asked and other people have asked. What has he done so far in communicating with the government and other people to try and get the power to cap private hire vehicles, and what has been the government's response to that?
There's a regular dialogue with government on this, and I was in a meeting with Al, with one of the ministers probably a year ago, talking about this very issue. I think they left the department soon after a reshuffle, and I think my take on it is I think DfT understand the issue and get the need to address it. I think it's more about prioritising their time and resource through a parliamentary process.
On capping, I would say that we've been told no verbally. The DfT are not interested in capping. They're more interested and sympathetic to the issue of cross-border hiring, especially as there's been issues out of London. They get that. And there's been interest, of course, in the pedicabs, and of course the election also threw a few things in the air where we were getting somewhere towards achieving it. So I think the capping issue at the moment, I think we've pretty much been told we're barking up the wrong tree.
Was that by Chris Grayling, or was that by another minister in the department? I mean, I don't know if you know who told you that.
It's been, well, you know, I've sat in meetings with Chris Grayling and with Lord Ahmed, and very constructive meetings, and it's been made pretty clear to us that capping wasn't going to be.
Okay, so the government is not sort of giving favourable noises about that, but
they don't see it as the solution.
Okay, but the cross-border hiring is a big issue as well, obviously, because if you don't give a licence to one company, they can get licensed in another area, Brighton or Sheffield or somewhere, and just operate in London. So what's the situation with talks with the government on that issue? You say they're more favourable, but how often are you meeting the government?
There's actually a technical working group now on a number of these issues, which we send a couple of TfL officers to. Do you want to?
Helen, I'm afraid I don't know the detail of that. Yeah. We can supply more details on that engagement. I think there's a kind of framework about how we would like cross-border hiring to work, and there's a consensus across the various operators. I'm afraid I don't know your core issue of whether that's got any traction within the department, but I will go back and maybe it's one of these things we can follow up with a letter and just let you know.
Isn't. I think that to begin with, it became apparent that for some areas it's not as simple as it looks. Because if you're in an area where there's a lot of licensing authorities in a small zone, actually they need to have cross-border hiring to have an efficient market. So it's how you would deal with that, and that's become more apparent that there are voluntary ways of licensing authorities clustering together and agreeing some common standards, and that so that this is all kind of quite a technical legal area, and some of it was a bit more complex, and by definition we're working with local government where there are different aspirations in different areas. So there is more interest in it, but I wouldn't say that we've got the magic solution on the stocks yet.
Okay. Just one other thing. Have you spoken or met with the all-party parliamentary group? I think that's led by Wes Streeting. Have you met with them to discuss these issues as well?
I've met with the Member of Parliament who is pushing a private member's bill at the moment, who is Dan Zeichner, and he's getting a degree of government help. Some of that work seems now to be focusing on the issue of information and data about the drivers themselves. So, of course, if somebody seeks registration in one area and is refused, just having some data there, and I've just hit a memory block, I can't remember exactly. Yeah. But there is a private member's bill being worked up, I think.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd just like to welcome the Freedom Pass Rovers, who I believe are coming.
Hey.
Welcome.
I join you shortly.
Yeah.
Actually, TfL pass rather, Freedom Pass.
We now move to Caroline.
Yes, I'll just pick up a couple of questions on roads maintenance funding. Could you give us an update on your discussions with central government over VED? And given TfL said it can't afford to undertake proactive road maintenance work without, I think, VED devolution, what alternative sources of funding are you looking at to maintain the road network?
We've set up many times how we feel it's inequitable that Londoners pay VED, but the money is used for the motorway network across the country. A very little of that comes into the capital. Chris Graham, the Secretary of State, issued a consultation. I can't remember if it was just before, I think it was just before Christmas, on something called the Major Road Network, and that is a potential new network, a designation of network that could be used for some of that VED income could be spent on projects on that network. And that consultation is out at the moment. We will respond to that because it's setting out kind of criteria for how you would define the network, mainly on the basis of number of vehicles using it. And we think there are, in urban settings, there are other factors to be taken into account, such as congestion, such as air quality and things like that, and how we address issues such as public transport as well. So we will be responding to that, and we feel that as the biggest lever out there to try and access some of that money. It's quite interesting, the document of the consultation has a map, a notional map of the network, and it goes to the North and South Circular. So it goes to a lot of the TLRN that comes into London. So it's progress. It does move move beyond the motorway network to some of the TLM, but just to the North and South Circular. But I do think it does highlight some of the lack of understanding of the network in London. So, for example, the roads that approach the Woolwich Ferry are in that network. The roads that approach the Blackwall Tunnel are not in that network. And anyone who knows those roads knows that, if you're going to choose which is the major road, it would be the Blackwall Tunnel approaches rather than the approaches to the Woolwich Ferry. So I think there's a dialogue with government on that at civil servant level, senior civil servant level, that my colleague Lily Matson is leading, and we are trying to discuss the response to that consultation before it goes in. But that is a opportunity to lever in some funding for road maintenance for London.
There's been multiple lines of connection
Yes.
on this topic. We have shouted through every keyhole. So we've had, Ian Nunn started and Simon Killenback continued talking to Treasury and, officials there. The Mayor's Office, which maintains a dialogue with the Treasury. Obviously, we've raised it with at ministerial meetings. We can't stress anymore quite how bizarre it is that London gets no roads funding and yet we're all paying those who drive road tax and petrol tax and all the rest of it. It is bizarre. And London councils, notwithstanding the fact they were very upset about the treatment of the corridor funding, etc. for LIPS, volunteered to make cross-party common lobbying work with us on this very issue. We fear there's a pattern developing because, of course, when the air quality funding was announced recently, we were told explicitly that London couldn't bid. And, of course, London has got 40% of the most air polluted roads in the country. So what is that about? Why is it that London can have these big problems, can pay its taxes and yet not get help on these issues?
Thank you for that. I mean, I'm sure we did put in our congestion report about needing a VD devolved to London and so on. So I'm sure we could look at whether we as a committee could do a response to that, supporting it, so that if you could point us in the direction.
I think we need that kind of cross-party support.
I think that fits in what we had said. And linking on from that, in that report we did on congestion, we put forward the need for road pricing to be looked at by the Mayor. You said yourself, a huge number of responses said road pricing is potentially needed as part of the Mayor's transport strategy. Are you going to consider this going forward in the future? Particularly, I think also your recent independent study on congestion commissioned by TfL put this forward as well.
Well, the two things that I think we've said before, one is that the congestion charging equipment, as it stands at the moment, the system will need refreshing and replacing in the future. So we've got to do work ready for that. But the other thing is, as you'll be aware, we're keen on electrification of vehicles. And, we get to a point where, let's hope, all vehicles in London are environmentally sustainable. We've immediately got a problem with the current exemptions. The government has a problem with a lack of income from fuel duties. The world is changing, and I think the point is that we are needing to do blue sky research and thinking now about how the future would look for London. So within the period of the Mayor's transport strategy, but not within the current Mayor's term. But we do need to think long term about these things.
The other thing I'd say is that the LIPS guidance that goes to the boroughs will go out at the same time as the Mayor's transport strategy, and that's also an opportunity for us to work with the boroughs on some of these initiatives. So I think post the local elections, I think there will be further discussions with the boroughs on what they want to do in their local area.
I presume the workplace parking levy discussions, the Dudden Hill thing you were talking about earlier, I could see that could work, that boroughs could work together and levy that to help fund that sort of scheme.
I know a number of boroughs, and I won't name them for privacy reasons, have visited or had conversations with Nottingham, where there is a real scheme in operation now to see. And of course Nottingham's a very different place from most of the boroughs in London, but there is active interest in the topic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, now move to Steve.
Thank you. I'll be moving on to bus services, but lastly, I'm really, from the previous conversation, Val, good to see you, and Alex, the conversation about the major road network, I'm pleased your response around that. Speaking to some senior colleagues, not in this building, but elsewhere, they were relatively unsighted on this consultation piece, which I think runs out on the 19th of March, because there are opportunities in these present straitened times.
That consultation on the major road network is a consultation about the criteria. It's not the bidding.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, so that is, we are responding to that one. Yeah.
because even though, as you pointed out, some obvious roads have been
A23
not mentioned, but A22 and A23.
Yes.
Purley Cross is very much mentioned.
Yeah.
So I'm quite excited about that. But turning to bus services, you mentioned earlier about bus service capacity and increasing out of London. Everyone in this committee sees the benefits of that, particularly around if we want to get people using, with the modal shift, using public services, they need those bus services. And there are great swathes of outer London where we're not served well by bus services. And we've had this conversation for some time about what I call the rebalancing of bus services from inner to outer London. Val, would you like to comment on how that conversation, or in practicality, that's been moved on?
Well, of course, we've had an issue about drop-off and bus passenger numbers in some areas. And there's been some reductions in frequencies in some areas because of it. In particular, there's been removals of some buses in preparation for the transformation of Oxford Street and the coming on stream of Crossrail 1 Elizabeth Line. We're pleased to say that the signs are now that reduction in bus users has stabilised. We think the hopper ticket has been important as part of that. The bus priority programmes has been important as part of that. That needed to be stabilised. And there was a paper taken through TfL board last year on the review of services to hospitals. So those programmes are moving forward. The other schemes are around looking at through the sort of growth.
Like Barking Riverside.
The growth agenda, looking at areas where the population is growing, are those projects going in where we need to be putting bus services. But it's very much work in progress at the moment, and there's a lot more to be done on it. I know there is. Still early days.
Yeah, that is, I know that you're passionate around that, but it is, we've been having this conversation last year, I think, about last summer's review with boroughs, and we're now February now. And I think we need, the Oxford Street piece has been talked about and referred to considerably. That is obvious, but there has to be something more to it, surely.
I know you're right, Steve. I would say that there was a huge practical delivery programme put in place on the bus priority schemes, and that was about stemming the loss of bus passengers because of traffic congestion. That, I can't remember off the top of my head how much we spent, but it's been a very major programme of bus corridors have been improved. So it's perhaps not so visible sort of sitting here, but we're definitely seeing the impact in terms of the improved journey times and efficiency of the bus routes. So we've stemmed the flow there. But, we need to move on through the review to look at areas where we do need more investment.
Yeah.
I know that there's conversation with the boroughs separately about their bus routes, and what I would welcome and thank you for is that TfL are moving towards a more strategic review of bus areas. So rather than look at individual routes, we'll take areas out, for example, New Addington, Forestdale, Selsdon, they'll look at the complete area and talk around that. But my point really, and I think this is the challenge that we all have, is that as constituency members we'll get requests for additional buses on certain routes, and we'll go to TfL and TfL will say, hear what you're saying, but there's no business case. The cost of it are prohibitive, so we can't do it. And I think this is the challenge we get, because clearly we've got to look at increasing potentially bus services in outer London areas to get people out of cars and on buses, but we've somehow got to get over that hurdle of the affordability. I don't know the answer to it, but I think that's the quandary that you've probably got.
I think if we just step back for a minute and look at the number of passenger seats in London, we're about to see the big Crossrail uplift. We'll have the Northern Line extension uplift. There's been improvements in the DLR. Yeah. There's something like a 2% increase in the Northern Line frequency and a 7% increase in Jubilee Line frequency this year. The improvements in the timetables on the tube network, and the doubling of the... So we're seeing a growth of public transport generally, and that is going to have some impacts on the bus service, where how do people make their journeys. But I absolutely hear what you say, Steve. We know that we have more work to do in investing in outer London.
It's the old narrative that I had with the previous mayor, and you'll agree this as a Croydon person yourself, is that it's all very well saying there's a big increase in public transport across rail and undergrounds, but if you're out in the Suttons and the Croydons and Bromleys, you're nowhere near any of that stuff.
But that's where the opportunity of, in some areas reducing capacity because we've got other growth, other transport growth, gives us an opportunity to release some capacity elsewhere, but is a very tight business plan, as you can see. So we're also looking for services that will be used and used well.
I get that. My last question is really about express routes. The X26, we know and love, is it? I've just been briefed that that's the only one we've got, which of course goes Heathrow, Sutton, Croydon, and probably some other wonderful places to be named, and is now a double-decker, which is good, very exciting. Are there any other plans about increasing express routes?
I know that they are being looked at, I think, down at Heathrow. The 142 is being looked at, and other routes are being looked at. I haven't got a list in front of me now, but we are certainly looking at the those being more common across London. They're the exception, aren't they? The norm rather than the norm. The X26 is in legend.
Well, the X26 is the X26 now, but it's been there for about 150 years by one name or another. It's an amazing route, really.
But the challenge with
the
that...
X68 is also still very...
The challenge, of course, when you put one in, everyone writes to say, well, could it stop there and there as well? And it doesn't, it becomes less of an express.
I think you should also be aware, comes back to the new technology bit, that things are changing. There's we've had the Transport for London has a power called, what is it called, the LSP, the
London Service
Permit. So TfL has to grant permission for anybody to operate a bus, be it private or public. And we've been having a number of applications from private bus operators doing something that I would say is between the minicab and the service bus, serving an area. And now I think there's a very interesting, particularly for areas where maybe a little on-demand hopper, but the on-demand service is a hopper bus servicing a station, for example. Not in competition with the public service bus, but where there's a gap in the market. And I think those are interesting ideas, and we are looking at.
Thank you.
TfL are looking at whether or not there are some of those that could be supported.
Thank you very much.
Right, we've just got one more subject heading on. Hopefully it'll be very quick. If you're okay with that, Deputy Mayor. Sean?
I just want to have a little look at Crossrail 2. So could you provide us with an update of the discussions you've been having with the government around funding for Crossrail 2?
Do you want to do this one?
Yeah, go on. Funding financial. We put in the outline business case in March 17, I think it was. So it's been with government for some time. I think the reality is that this is a very expensive project, and it's a major government decision to take about how you progress it and how you fund it. And the challenge is, can London fund more for the project, and can it fund it sooner? And in the budget, it was in the autumn, it was agreed that there would be another funding and financing review, and that work has started to look at those issues again about how you can reduce costs through various means, and that will report in the autumn. So it is a very big decision for the whole project, and there is a further look with government about how you can kind of reduce the costs of the scheme. But there is the other thing we shouldn't lose sight of. While there was an ongoing debate about funding and financing, the government did also say that they do support the project, which is really important, really, because you'll see in the London Plan and the Mayor's Plan Transport Strategy, it's the kind of jewel in the crown of both of those to unlock the growth that London really needs.
So you're saying that TfL are also having a look at what changes they could possibly bring forward to meet their sort of new finance.
After TfL put the original business case in, the government then asked TfL to amend the business case to show how we could cover 50% of the cash throughout the project, so that's quite challenging. And then they've come back and said, yes, you know, we still support Crossrail, but we want an independent financial review to look at whether or not you could improve the, you know, reduce the costs and how viable what's proposed is. So it seems to be a long, slow process, but it's still moving in the right direction. But we appreciate the fact that we would like to be able to consult to make sure that we've got all of the routes protected, safeguarded, and that Londoners know what we're working on. However, this is a joint project with the government, so we're unable at the moment to release all of the detail without government's consent.
So it'd be a bit early to start talking about hybrid bills to Parliament.
We're still working towards that, but clearly you need an agreed funding strategy. You can't put in a hybrid bill, it's a bit like a Transport Works Act order, until you're clear that you've got all of the money to deliver the scheme. Otherwise, you know, what
Parliament won't waste its time on
no,
it.
I just,
you've got a funding package agreed with the government.
In our discussion, so I put it out there. Listening to your early answer obviously makes that slightly defunct is the word that's been thrown around on this side of the table. I mean, just to wrap up, clearly it's very, very difficult to especially with this 50% across the project rather than backloaded. How confident are TfL that they can actually achieve this? You know, there's lots of pressure on TfL's funding, revenue's hard to find, you know, bus passengers end up going down, etc. Can Londoners be confident that TfL will be able to get this done?
We answered that exam question when we were asked to. The paperwork and proposals went in. It wasn't easy and it wouldn't be easy to do, but we know we could achieve it if that's what we needed to do. So, you know, we've jumped every hurdle we've been asked to jump, and quickly, and well, I think.
I'm sure. I'm going to stop there, Chair. I'm sure it's a subject we'll return to.
It's very firmly in the Mayor's transport strategy. We are not holding back on this one. It is a key project for the 2030s for the future of London.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
David, very quickly.
Just a quick one on something slightly related but not exactly the same. I asked the Mayor last month about whether he had plans to extend the Crossrail 1, the Elizabeth line from Abbey Wood to Ebbsfleet. He said he was. He said he was putting forward a business plan. I mean, how serious is he about this and the business plan and funding?
It's definitely your territory, Alex.
This one is in the Mayor's transport strategy. It's a good scheme that does unlock a lot of housing in South East London, but also beyond South East London. The Mayor is serious about it. However, the other thing to be mindful of is the Thames Estuary Growth Commission, which is chaired by Doug Armit, is it? I think it is, who is John Armit, sorry, who will report this Easter on the growth plans for the Thames Estuary. And my personal view is this extension is probably the biggest facilitator of growth in that region. So I would hope and expect to see strong emphasis on that project, but also some understanding about how it will be funded. It is safeguarded all the way through to Ebbsfleet under the original Crossrail Act in any event. But whilst the Mayor is very keen for it, it's also recognised that a lot of the benefits are outside of London, and therefore they should pay their fair share of this project to get it delivered. Either it's a national project from DfT or the authorities in Kent should also contribute significant amounts to this project.
So it would take the Abbey Wood branch
further
out, great benefit to Bexley, and then of course all of the councils outside.
One of the concerns I do have is for the existing communities who are there who don't want, you know, some of their existing, you know, homes demolished and then built over, you know. So I mean, what sort of plans do you have to make sure that those people, you know, don't lose their homes, and then sort of any housing development might sort of happen away from existing homes?
The councils that represent those people are supporting this project, and of course the alignment is nowhere near detailed or settled.
Well, so the line was safeguarded, and I'm not aware of any kind
But it's
of
a very broad safeguard.
Yeah, that's true. It's under the original Act, but it's. I did see your Mayor's question, Tom, on that, and I think the other thing to bear in mind is that if it is extended, there are two choices to make with that extension. Is do you use the existing track envelope, where you're working with existing framework and there would be no impact on properties, or do you have a separate new set of tracks for the Crossrail or Elizabeth Line services to give them that kind of priority on that network?
Yeah,
and that,
extra capacity.
you know, those are two very different schemes, and we're not there at the moment in defining which one we go down.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much, and once again, thank you for your time, overstaying a bit. It's very kind of you. Very, very interesting discussion, lots of information. Very much look forward to the new MTS when it's published, without the track changes, no doubt. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
So is that discussion noted?
Yeah.
Noted. Lovely, thank you. So just to finish off, I did mention that our next meeting is on the 19th of February at 3 p.m. We've got Jeremy Vine as a guest, so that might be of interest. And other than that, I don't believe there's any other business for me to discuss. So thank you very much.
GLA Chamber